Welcome to this session we've called possibly the most important lesson ever about remote working. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to help you think through something that is really critical in remote working so that you can fine-tune your behaviour and improve what you do. My name is Bob Bannister and I work for an organisation called iManage Performance Limited. Let me just take literally 10-15 seconds to tell you about iManage and then we'll get straight into the content. iManage is a training company, behavioural skills organisation that helps people to develop their personal capabilities in all sorts of situations, management, leadership or team behaviours. And as a business, we really value changing people for good. That's why we're in business. And how do we do that? Well, we like to create environments that challenge people to think and act. And the way we deliver that, the what, is in training courses, in leadership organisational behavioural skills, using a blended range of training solutions to reach out to people. We've been operating for over 20 years and operate in all sorts of management leadership space, but particularly have been focusing in the last 20 years around remote working. So what we're going to do is draw on a whole bunch of experience that comes from real world, but also the academic world in this short presentation. Now, if you have any questions for me, I would like you to be able to ask them right now or whenever you think of them through the next 20 minutes. So you'll see on the screen here, we put slido.com with a hashtag WFH2020. Now, if you open up any browser on your phone or on any device, another browser window, you can type slido.com in and use that hashtag or use the QR code that's on the screen right now. And you can ask me questions. Now, because this is a recorded message, I will be answering those live. So as you ask them, I can answer those throughout the presentation. So please open that window. Feel free to ask me anything as we work through. So as an organisation working in the remote space, we've gained a whole bunch of different experience. It started nearly 20 years ago when we were working with Diageo, the big drinks company, who was shutting down one of their big offices in London and doing something quite fancy back then, which was called hot desking. And that began our journey really of exploring what this means to manage people who are geographically dispersed or to be a team member who's working from their home or from any hub around the world in actual fact. That led us to a rather significant programme with a number of councils, but specifically Essex County Council came first, and we helped them as they began to shut down buildings and create home workers. That rolled into an agile initiative with West Sussex County Council. And then it started to tumble. We began to be seen as experts in this space. So social housing, insurance, travel, construction, banking, public sector, private sector, a whole range of different organisations who started to use remote working. Now, of course, the whole world really has been remote working over recent months, and that's made a massive difference to us in terms of the interest of new clients that have come on board with us, but it still continues to add the experience and the knowledge, because even over the last 3 months with COVID, we've gained new insights, we've learned new things about remote working. But on top of all that practical stuff, I want to share with you something that is also academic. So we've been working with local university down here in the south of England and a particular professor who's been specialising in the impact of technology on the way we work and has some really interesting insights into remote working. So we're going to be capitalising on best practice, but also academic insight as we look at the topic over the next 20 minutes or so. So let's look at this slide here. It's a pan, and you might be thinking, well, what's that about? What I want to do is to encourage you to think about what the ingredients of trust are. So if we were to make a trust stew, okay, come with me on this journey. If we were to put some ingredients in the pot and boil it down and cook it, what would we put in there? What are some of the ingredients of trust? Now, you might want to take a pen or a pencil and have a quick scribble there and just take a moment to think about what makes you trust somebody else. And there could be a whole bunch of different things that you would want to put into the mix. Let me show a few ideas, things that people would typically say if I asked this question in a live workshop. So we've got some things here. There's sort of history. I trust somebody when there's some history involved, when they prove themselves reliable or honest in the past. So again, that's history related. Perhaps where there's a competence evident, somebody does a good job, they're good at what they do, then I'm more willing to trust them. It might be reputational. If you wanted a new plumber, for example, and your neighbor recommended somebody to you, you'd probably give them a try. And if they did a good job for you then as well, you'd probably be very willing to have them back next time because they demonstrated their competence. And now you've also got a bit of a history and relationship with them. So you can see how trust builds, but it starts with some of these things as well. Now, it might be that I trust you because you seem believable or credible, I might say. You seem genuine. So there's something about your character that might come through that helps me to trust you. Relationship is going to be key. I am much less likely to trust a stranger than I am somebody I know very well. And you can see other things on my list here. I trust when it's low risk. I'll show you why that is in a moment. I trust when it's safe. It's much easier to trust somebody in a safe environment. I trust when you've got proven experience, you know what you're doing, when you are capable. Now, why am I putting these ingredients up here and getting us to think about trust? Well, the insight that we've learned over recent times is that trust can be very easily damaged in remote working environments. There are a number of reasons for that, and I'll show you those reasons in a moment. But this is really significant. Because if we are working in a remote team, specifically in the long game, as we do more of this around the world, learning from the last few months of change and using that as a catalyst to change our working behaviors, we really need to be careful in the long game that we don't start to damage trust. And therefore, being a good team worker or being a remote team manager, it becomes really important I focus on maintaining that trusting environment in the team. So let me just show you another slide here. If you take these various ingredients and you if you put it on the hob, as it were, turn the temperature up and reduce those contents into some sort of sticky jus that's in the bottom of the pan, what would that reduction look like? Well, I'm going to suggest that here are three very well thought through ideas around trust. If we reduce those ingredients down, if you like, if we list them under subheadings, three ideas: intimacy, credibility, and risk come to the fore. Now, what we've got here, you can see under intimacy, I've listed things like relationship, honesty, history, reputation, whether we feel somebody is genuine or not. Under credibility, I've put those things like experience, proven record, believable, reliable, capable, competence, etc. And under risk, I put safety and low risk from my original list. So you could do the same with your list. You could break that down and you could see actually these three ideas are well thought through. We trust people when there is intimacy, when there is credibility, when risk is low. Now I want to take these three ingredients and make some sense of them. So I put them here in a formula. Now don't worry about the maths, but there is some logic to this formula. And the formula is trust equals intimacy times credibility divided by risk. Now, risk is a divider because the higher the risk, actually, the more intimacy and credibility I need to be willing to trust. But I'll come back to that and flesh that out in a moment. Now, the key here and why this is applicable in remote working environments is that all of these three areas, intimacy, credibility, and risk, can very easily be damaged when my team becomes geographically dispersed. So we'll look at the reasons for that, and that will give us some ideas into the antidote, how we maintain trust as a remote working team. So let's go with the first of these three ideas and visit intimacy. Now, we might not think that's a very professional word. We could phrase it professional intimacy, if you like. If we ask what is intimacy, it's that sort of how close am I to somebody? I suppose traditionally we might say two intimate people are two connected people, and then you've got shades of separation. Now, the further I am away from you, the less likely I am to trust you. If you are a complete stranger, I am pretty unwilling to trust you in that first instance unless I'm being very, very generous. But if I know you very well, I've got a good history with you and there's a strong, good relationship, then I'm much more willing and ready to trust you. But of course, as we can see here from this slide, intimacy can be damaged very easily and quickly by remote working. It's obvious to think about it. Firstly, there is a massive amount of reduced contact. In fact, it's way less than we might think. In an average day in the office, I'm likely to connect with over 20 people, and I'm likely to use between 4,000 and 10,000 words of dialogue. Now that's a big range, 4,000 to 10,000 words, but people have different jobs. That's a normal working day for most people. Now in a remote environment, that reduces significantly. I'm more likely to connect with 1 or 2 people during the course of that day, and I'm more likely to use less than 1,000 words of dialogue, of interaction with the other person. Now, that is actually a significant reduction in contact and communication. So you can see actually very quickly, I start to lose knowledge and insight about the other person. We use more asynchronous communication. Now, what is that? Well, synchronous communication is dialogue. It's in the moment. So if I'm having a conversation with you, it's right now. Now, some technology allows synchronous conversation. So for example, chat messaging is in the moment, it's live. If I pick up a phone call, that's synchronous. If I use video conferencing, that is synchronous. But all the evidence suggests, historically, there is a greater tendency to rely on email, which is asynchronous. And that is much less insightful, and there are particular reasons for this that we haven't got time to go into now, but it's much more insightful in terms of my relationship with you and getting to know you and continue to mature the rapport and relationship that I have with you. There's much less knowledge of each other when we're remote working. I don't oversee or witness you working alongside me. I don't overhear the coffee conversations that you're having with other people, for example. There's much slower integration if I'm a new team member. You know, you can imagine, and some of you may be in this place where you started a new job in recent months and you haven't actually physically met your colleagues yet. It takes much longer to build that relationship, that intimacy, that connectedness with your colleagues because you're not physically together. And of course, there is a potential for greater isolation, for being more alone, for having less connections with people, maybe we're finding actually a new finding that a lot of people are spending a lot of time in sort of Zoom meetings or Skype meetings or MS Teams or whatever it might be, and they're locked into a small group of people for much longer in the day, and they're not connecting with other people, and maybe even are ducking out of those sessions a little bit because they're sitting in the background and other people are perhaps domineering them and they can't get their word in. So intimacy can very quickly and easily be damaged. The second area then, let's look at credibility for a moment or two. In a similar way, it's very easy for credibility to take a hit when we start remote working. Now, there are a number of reasons for this, but here are 3 of the big reasons. Firstly, as we can see on the slide, we remove virtually all the social learning. Now, what is social learning? It's that learning that occurs when I overhear or witness somebody else doing something. So this is a big part of the way in which adults learn in the workplace. One model says it's 70% of how we learn. You know, I witness you make a phone call in the office, it goes well, I learn from that. I witness you make another phone call and that doesn't go so well, I learn from that as well. And we remove that osmosis, if you like, we remove that social learning opportunity in a major way when I become a remote worker. And that can dull my improvement, my credibility, my capability. So what happens is, over the long game, I stop sharpening the saw and improving what I'm doing because I'm not learning from those people all around about me. It slows the process of learning. I also no longer see how you are working. That either you as my colleague or you as my boss, or if you're the manager, you no longer see how your team members are working. And it's very easy for people to fill that with negative thoughts. I'm not sure Bob did that in the right way. I'm unsure whether he's using the correct procedure because I'm not witnessing Bob use that procedure. So we start to raise doubt around somebody's credibility. And then there's a really interesting phenomena that's emerged around remote working, and that is that people seem more willing to make promises that they don't keep in a remote world. And of course, that massively damages credibility because effectively you're letting people down. You're not keeping up those commitments that you made. And so there's a potential that others around about you start to go, oh, I'm not sure Bob is really going to deliver that when he said he's going to deliver it. There's a couple of reasons potentially for that. One is actually that it's easier to commit when it's not sort of face-to-face, and the commitment is made lighter. But the other, interestingly, is that people who are remote working have this sort of inbuilt desire to please because they know they're no longer seen in the office, so they want to make themselves known really by being keen and eager. And that may, in some instances, lead to over-promising and then being unable to keep that promise and under-delivering. So credibility can take a significant hit. And then let's look at our third idea, the risk. Now, I mentioned already, this is a divisor. So the higher the risk, the more intimacy and credibility I need to be willing to trust you. Here's a simple example of that. If I was walking along a cliff top, Beachy Head or something down in the south, on the towpath, a good few meters from the edge, I'd happy to walk with you along that path. But actually, if you were holding a rope and I was hanging over the cliff, the risk has now gone sky high for me. So I would need much more relationship with you, much more intimacy, and much more credibility in your competence to hold that rope with my weight on before I'd be willing to trust you. So the model becomes really well thought through at this point, the risk as a divisor. But going back to remote working, I guess the question we should be asking is, does risk go up when I remote work? And the answer to that is absolutely. I've got lone worker isolation. Somebody in their kitchen falls over, there's nobody to pick them up like there would be in the office. We've got more maverick decision making and action taking happening in remote working. The evidence shows that people are more likely to do something and take their own view of it rather than check with colleagues before acting on a particular decision. There's reduced levels of support and guidance. Again, I haven't got others around about me, my boss or whoever, just sort of give me a nudge and steering me in a particular direction. So it's possible I make the wrong decisions in some situations. And of course, I can be out of sight, out of mind. The evidence actually suggests that remote workers aren't promoted quite so well as people who are in a hub and visible. So there's a risk there, personal risk as well as organizational risks. So you can see through this model that there's many reasons why trust can be damaged when we're remote working. So what we need to do is work against those things. We need to increase intimacy, we need to maintain credibility, and we need to reduce risk. Have a look at these quick ideas here. Intimacy. We need to, relationship building is no longer fluffy. We need to work at relationship building in our teams. There needs to be a new emphasis on team get-togethers. Credibility, we need to develop domain expertise and replace that social learning. There's ways we can do that if we think about it. Risk, we need to reduce individual risk. We need to check in with our colleagues to make sure they're okay and maintain support for them. And of course, we need to be aware of organizational risks, and we need to make sure that we're covering those risks as an organization. So really important ideas, and really just a little insight into why we must focus on maintaining trust when we become a remote team worker. Now, if you want some more information, then please do connect with me. We have a podcast called Squeeze that you can access every Monday. There's lots of remote working content in that podcast. If you would like these slides, then email me. It's on the screen right now, bob.bannister@imanageperformance.com. There's a weekly blog that we post on our website, imanageperformance.com, and we have an online training called tool called remoteworking.global. So all of those resources, please have a look at and familiarize yourself with and make use of. Thank you so much for listening. Do ask those questions by slido.com, the hashtag WFH2020. That will be open for a week from today, so put any questions in there. I will continue to answer those over the coming days. Thank you very much.